Hi everyone. So in the whole Mac versus PC for audio debate, I thought I'd cover a specific topic today, which is USB for audio dead? Maybe it's quite a controversial topic, maybe it's a foregone conclusion, but this week, Slate Digital announced their new virtual recording system, which is probably the kind of direction that the industry is now going to take, whether it is for virtual microphones or not. That's going to be kind of a leading light. And what's interesting is the two options on there are Thunderbolt, which is currently going to be only Mac compatible, although that may change in the future, and PCI Express, which is only Windows compatible but may change in the future. Slate have actually said they're going to make drivers for the PCI Express specifically to work with older Mac Pro towers. So that's going to happen. But USB is not an option, and Stephen Slate specifically called that out in his opening speech of his new hardware. And that got me thinking, why not USB? And then it occurred to me that in this studio, I have not used USB for an interface in nearly a decade. And not just because it's bad for audio, because the question then becomes, why is it bad for audio? But that leads on to a whole host of questions, which, again, the whole Mac versus PC thing, it goes back to when USB 2 first came out, and FireWire was the new Apple standard. And this, I think, was one of the reasons that a lot of the audio guys went to the Mac system, is that it natively had FireWire in that was certified and worked perfectly, when that was kind of the gold standard unless you could afford a Pro Tools HD system, which a lot of us mere mortals couldn't. And that was your option, because the way that USB works, let's just break this down for a minute. USB uses what's called a packetting system, where it gathers a whole bunch of data up in one big block, waits a while until it's got enough data, then sends it down the USB stream to whatever device. Now, when USB 1 was designed, it was only meant for things like kind of really slow flash drives and mice and keyboards and that kind of thing. And it developed into so much more. It developed into something you can plug a hard drive into, which again, that wasn't a problem because big chunks of data work with a hard drive because they'll go in one big lump, big lump, big lump. And that hard drives don't care. They just want all the data as soon as they can. Thank you very much. But with audio, that's a problem because the time that it takes to load up that buffer to send down the audio stream is time that the computer is waiting to send the audio out to the speakers, waiting to receive the last lot of audio from the interface. It's just waiting and waiting. And with USB 2, it's 480 megabits per second, which sounds like loads, but when you're waiting for a big chunk of that data, it doesn't matter how many megabits per second it is in total, you're waiting, and that waiting means latency, and latency means bad things. And that's where PCs lagged behind at that time, because Macs, a lot of the eMacs and then the new iMacs all had FireWire inbuilt. If you've seen the kind of the retro episodes that I did, I got a newer Focusrite Liquid Sapphire 56, so a modern, I think it's still in production, if not, it was only last year that it stopped production. That interface worked perfectly well with a very old iMac, because at the time, I will agree with everyone that Apple were kind of king of the hill in terms of audio production. Fast forward to now, FireWire is not supported pretty much by anything. Chris actually has a MacBook, a 2012 MacBook with a FireWire port, and it doesn't want to work in OS X, so he's got to get a Thunderbolt to FireWire adapter just for the FireWire to work without the native port, which is really stupid. But FireWire at the time, going back to the whole packet thing, had much smaller packets that moved much quicker, which means that you could get the latency on the interface right down to something that you could live monitor. And that's what I did for a long time in here, for years. I did it on the PC side, but I, being very techie, kind of went out of my way to find the right chipset to use, the right drivers to use with Windows Vista, then 7, then 10. and made sure that I was really on top of the game with all that, because you had to be. But with Apple products, that did just work, and that's fair enough. But the USB, in terms of desktop audio, I think it's kind of coming to its end. It still works perfectly well with a few interfaces. The Audion ID4 that we're doing a review on at the moment seems to work fine. The RME Babyface that I have has a very low latency, because RME have gone out of their way to write their own drivers for USB that bypass everything that Windows and OS X knows and completely go round it and not do the packaging system like that, which has taken them years to do. And it's a proprietary system that they aren't sharing with everybody else. That's a separate thing, right? But the other side is, what about for iOS? Because the only way currently that I know to get a good interface to connect to an iPad is via the camera connector, which has a USB port. Now, with it not being a desktop operating system, they can really cut out the middleman and cut out a lot of the waiting time, a lot of the kind of operating system crap. So that seems to have really decent latency times for recording. I mean, it's not in the order of Thunderbolt interfaces, but then maybe that's the kind of thing that we'll see in future with iPad audio, because that's still an infant industry, and hopefully that will continue to grow. Hopefully I've given you something to think about with this, and that USB is probably not going to be that long for this world, especially not in the high-end audio. And as for USB 3, forget it, because even though it's 5 gigabit per second, it's exactly what I said before with the packaging thing. It's just bigger packets, which means it's the same latency, so it being a faster interface doesn't make it lower latency because of the inherent problems in the architecture. So there's only one USB 3 interface I can think of right now, and that's a PreSonus one, and the reviews it's had have not been amazing because of this problem that USB 2 and 3 all have this packaging system that can cause nightmares. So PCI Express and Thunderbolt seem to be the future, because Thunderbolt essentially is PCI Express. It's just kind of got a middleman to translate, but that's one of the reasons why you can't get very long Thunderbolt cables, because PCI Express is kind of like right into the direct veins of the computer. It's straight into the processor, which is why the latency is so low. It's not just a better interface, it is direct. It's not going through a USB chipset. It's not going through a FireWire chipset. It's just going straight in and straight to the CPU, does what it needs to do, goes through the RAM, comes straight back out, straight down a PCI Express lane. Bang. That is why Thunderbolt and PCI Express, which is essentially Thunderbolt, are the future. One last thing to talk about is USB-C ports. Be very careful with these, because this is a real sticking point that I can see why Apple and Intel and everybody for Thunderbolt 3 have used the USB-C connector, but be wary. USB-C is only a connection type. It splits off inside, and depending what the chipset has, it can support USB 3, USB 3.1. It can have mini display ports, so you can have a screen through it. It can have Thunderbolt 3, or it can have only one of them. It can, if the manufacturer decides not to support some of those things. I have a studio PC that's got a Z170 motherboard that's got a USB 3.1 USB-C socket on the back. Shut up. And it does not natively support Thunderbolt 3 or 2 or 1 because they just aren't on the chipset. Thunderbolt is not part of that, despite that Thunderbolt 3 connector is on there. It's not. It's a USB-C connector, which is the same that you'll see on all the modern phones apart from iPhones. Hopefully iPhones are going to switch to that as well at some point. But you can actually get a Thunderbolt 3 add-in card for this motherboard, and that links in to the PCI Express and has the same connector type, but what it sends over that cable is very different, and that's the important part. So if you're going to go down the Thunderbolt route, be very careful. I think in another video we're going to talk about the 2016 MacBook Pro and how that whole Thunderbolt USB-C thing has become a massive headache. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, give us a like. Please hit the subscribe button, or maybe buy us a beer on Patreon, because that would really help us. And hope to see you soon. Thanks for watching.